Sexist, racist attacks and misinformation about Senator Kamala Harris started circulating within hours after Joe Biden announced that she would be his pick for a running mate. President Trump stoked a false conspiracy theory that she is not eligible to run for vice president. He also called her, quote, angry and a madwoman. Other critics have called her ambitious. Now, women's groups are calling for an end to such attacks against Harris and are vowing to protect her leading up to November. Shaunna Thomas is the co-founder of one of those groups, UltraViolet. She joins us now for more. Shaunna, good to have you on the show. What are some of the common negative stereotypes you've seen used to discredit women in politics?
Sure, thanks for having me. So, attacking women on the basis of anything but their policy positions or the substance of what they're running on has been common and consistent for many decades now. Studies show that the most consistent types of attacks are that women are unqualified, that they are untrustworthy, that they're too emotional. There are studies across the globe that show that just an incredible volume of content of attacks focused on the way women dress, sexualized content, things that, again, have absolutely nothing to do with what they stand for or what they would deliver in terms of policy were they to be elected.
Well, what does the Biden campaign need to do to protect Harris as their vice presidential candidate from these attacks?
Sure. Well, so women, and particularly women of color, I mean, all in this cycle are going to face a barrage of attacks, and Kamala Harris is already facing them. And we knew that was coming, and the campaign absolutely knew that that was coming. And I think what they're doing is smart, which is to put forward, what she stands for, right? A positive message that you would expect anyone in her position to be sort of promoted with, but also to really hold the media accountable when there is coverage about her that is based in racist and sexist tropes, and to point out when that's happening, and to call it out for what it is. I mean, Kamala should not be in a position of having to defend herself, but the campaign at this point, I think, has done a really good job of highlighting the reality that women of color in particular face when they run for office, and ensuring that when there are attacks like the ones that you pointed out in this opening, that they're pushing back on those really quickly, and getting ahead of them before they can really take root in people's understanding of who she is and what she stands for.
I was really fascinated by the fact that the Biden campaign actually assembled women's groups like yours to protect the vice presidential nominee, to come to her support and her aid even before you knew who she was. You were enlisted to try and help defend what you knew were going to be some of these attacks that were coming. This is the third time a female has been tapped for a vice presidential nomination. Do you think that this reflects a greater understanding of the sexist attacks that women in politics face?
Yeah, look, this time we learned a lot in 2016. And that was that sexist coverage of a woman running at this level can absolutely have a massive impact on the election. And in fact, it did. And it's one of the biggest reasons why Donald Trump and not Hillary Clinton is sitting in the White House. And we knew going into the primaries with a record number of women running to be president of the United States, that sexism was going to need to be, as part of the coverage of these women, was going to need to be something that we were going to fight back against. So women's groups, including UltraViolet, have been really laying the groundwork for this moment, and in many ways sort of putting the media on notice, and social media platforms as well on notice, that if we're going to allow that we're not going to allow the proliferation and the dissemination of sort of hate speech, racist and sexist coverage of these women to dominate the headlines and to impact the way the voters understand them. So we have been focused on, helping the media understand their role in mitigating the sexist and racist attacks that come out both organically. Unfortunately, Donald Trump literally can't help himself. It's his first response when he sees a powerful woman is to attack her in a sexist and racist way. And the more sophisticated disinformation, campaigns that are launched online. Both of these types, both the organic and the sophisticated attacks, that are designed to play on society's implicit bias in order to sow discord and make it harder for women and people of color to get elected are things that we have been doing for months, that we will unfortunately have to continue to do. But hopefully with every single cycle, we'll get to the place where women and people of color are able to be elected without having to overcome these obstacles.
Well, you mentioned President Trump. Following Tuesday's announcement, the president used the word nasty to describe Harris. It's also a common moniker that he has given to many women. What can groups like yours actually do to combat sexism and sexist attacks in politics when it's coming from arguably the most powerful man in the world in this case?
Sure. Look, there's nothing you can do about stopping people like Donald Trump, whose whole worldview is incredibly sexist and racist, from launching those kinds of attacks. What we can do, and what studies show really works, is to educate people about the nature of those attacks, what they're designed to do, what they're really about, and why they're such a huge disservice to our democracy, to that specific person running for office, but to anybody who's looking, who's considering getting involved in politics, and voters themselves. So doing what we're doing right now, right? Having conversations with the media, having conversations directly with social media companies, and talking to our members. So the 1.2 million members for UltraViolet, we're talking to them directly on a regular basis about the kinds of themes, the kinds of attacks that we're seeing, how to spot them, how to talk to your neighbors and your community about them, and how to report them when you see either traditional media repeating those types of attacks, or racist and sexist and disinformation type, content being spread on social media platforms. People do not have to accept that. We don't need to retweet. We don't need to repost. We don't need to amplify that kind of content and give them air. We can report it and get it off, get it off the internet and get it off the airwaves, and do as much as we possibly can to mitigate the kind of harm that those people are trying to insert into our political process.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying that media need to do when the president says something that is perhaps a sexist attack. We report it and then we stop talking about it. Is that the suggestion?
So UltraViolet and a number of organizations put out a whole guide for the media on how to report on an election in a way that is not racist and not sexist, and create space for women and people of color to run for office and win without having to overcome these really unfair obstacles. And one of the biggest pieces of advice in there is don't amplify, don't repeat the disinformation and the hate speech, because what it does is give them air. Instead, you can describe the type of content that is out there, who are making those attacks, and give people an alternative understanding of why those attacks are coming in. Not that there are theories, not that there are theories being thrown at them, but there are literally racist and sexist attacks that are designed to make it harder for them to win. That there's literally no other substantive purpose to them. I think that's a really important role for the media to be playing, to call it out, to name it when they see it, and not to amplify it.
Shaunna, one last question for you. There are so many democracies that have had women in charge. We haven't here in this country. Do you think that we have a particular problem with sexism when it comes to women in leadership roles, particularly in politics?
Look, I think in the United States, we do have implicit biases that are sexist and racist. We all do. I think it is the case that while we have seen record numbers of women, people of color, running at all levels of office and seeing them win at record numbers over the past few years, there has been one of the things that has gotten, I think, in the way, and again, I think we did see this in 2016 of women running at the highest level, at this level, is sexism and the ways in which we permit sexist and racist attacks to proliferate, to dominate the conversation about the candidate rather than who they are, what they stand for, and that's why we putting so much energy and so much time into both working directly with the media and educating the public about why these kinds of attacks are unfair, what to look for, and how to report them when they see them.
All right, Shaunna Thomas of UltraViolet, an important conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.